Money should be easy to steal. It's practically made for that. For much of history, wealth has been valuable because it's portable. Coins fit in pockets, gold in safes, paper money in suitcases. Digital money resides in databases you've never seen. The easier money moves, the easier it is to exchange, and the easier it is to hide, hoard, manipulate, or steal. Every financial system you've ever lived in presupposes this hidden bargain. Fluidity brings efficiency, and efficiency invites risk. But on a small island in the Pacific Ocean, people have created a system entirely outside this logic. An island so heavy, so large, so visible. It was clear to everyone who owned what, making it virtually impossible to steal. Welcome to Yap Island. Yap is a tiny island in Micronesia, far from major trade routes, with no natural mineral deposits, gold, silver. Living in relative isolation for centuries, the Yap people built a complex society without a king, written contracts, or anything akin to modern money. Instead, they used stone. Not small stones, and certainly not symbolic tokens. Giant limestone discs weighing tons, with holes in the middle, quarried hundreds of kilometers away, transported across treacherous seas, and displayed for all to see in the villages. These were called rye stones, and they functioned as currency. At first glance, this might seem absurd. Why choose a medium of exchange that doesn't circulate? Why build wealth with something you can't carry? Why accept a system without physical transfer? These questions miss the point, because the value of rye stones didn't come from their usefulness, from scarcity, or from possession in the sense understood by modern economics. Their value came from what they represented: labor, danger, history, and, most importantly, shared belief. The limestone used to make these stones wasn't found in Yap. It was brought from the island of Palau, hundreds of kilometers away. Obtaining a stone required organizing an expedition, venturing out into the open sea in delicate canoes, negotiating with foreign communities, extracting the stone by hand, carving it, and then transporting it across the ocean. People died in the process. Canoes sank. Crews disappeared. The more perilous the journey, the greater the value of the surviving stone. Herein lies the first critical insight. Value wasn't assigned at the end of the process. It accumulated throughout the story. The stone itself was less important than the narrative attached to it. Who financed it? Who sailed it? Who died bringing it? Which storms it survived? These details were stored in collective memory, passed down orally, and socially accepted. The island functioned as a living ledger. Everyone knew the history of the stones, which ones were more valuable and why. And when a stone arrived at Yap, something interesting happened. It stopped moving. Rye stones were placed in conspicuous spots outside houses, on the edges of villages, near paths. Ownership could change without a single touch of the stone. A family could pay a bride price, resolve a dispute, acknowledge a debt, or transfer an inheritance. The transaction was social, not physical. Society was updating its shared understanding of who owned what. Let's be clear, the Yap people didn't buy fish, tools, or daily food with stone money. Daily life was conducted through barter, reciprocity, and small exchanges. Rye stones weren't cash. They were used for moments with lasting consequences: marriages, inheritance, compensation for serious disputes, alliances between clans. In modern terms, they functioned more like property deeds or government bonds than cash. A simple example clarifies the situation. Imagine a giant stone standing beside a village road. Everyone knows it belongs to one family. When a marriage is arranged, ownership passes to another family. But the stone doesn't move. No one rolls it away or locks it up. What changes is the shared understanding. From that moment on, everyone agrees that the stone now belongs to someone else. This agreement is the transaction itself. The stone is merely an anchor that keeps the memory true. This might sound fragile, but it wasn't, because you couldn't just steal a rye stone and pretend it was yours. Everyone knew where it came from, its story, who it belonged to yesterday. Theft required collective consensus, and that consensus couldn't be silently forged. There was no anonymity, no secrecy, no private hoarding. Wealth was in plain sight, protected not by force, but by memory. In a security-obsessed world, Yap had unknowingly built something remarkably secure. This system shaped behavior in a way that modern money rarely does. Because wealth was visible, reputation mattered. Because property was public, responsibility followed. Because stones couldn't be hidden, power couldn't escape scrutiny. The system discouraged reckless accumulation and rewarded stability. Wealth wasn't a weapon, but a signal of contribution, trust, and continuity. This is where the story ceases to be an exotic anthropology and becomes disturbing. Because however strange the rye stones may seem, the underlying logic is far from unfamiliar. In fact, it's much closer to modern finance than most people would like to admit. Ownership without physical possession. Value detached from material use. Wealth defined by collective belief rather than intrinsic function. The Yap people didn't misunderstand money. They understood it too well to claim it was about objects. They constructed money in such a way that it couldn't be stolen secretly, because it couldn't be possessed secretly. A system where inflation was limited by social memory, where trust wasn't abstract but secured by visibility. And for a long time, it worked. However, systems based on shared belief have a critical weakness. They collapse not when resources run out, but when belief runs out. At the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, European colonial powers reached Micronesia. German administrators, then Japanese and American officials, encountered the rye stones and tried to understand them through a Western lens. They saw large rocks sitting outside the villages and struggled to grasp how this could function as currency. To them, the system was inefficient, irrational, and primitive. Then they did what modern institutions often do when faced with unfamiliar systems. They optimized it. Colonial officials documented the stones, measured them, cataloged their ownership, and most critically began producing new stones using modern tools. What used to require perilous sea voyages and massive manpower could now be done quickly, cheaply, and safely with steel tools and ships. The stones flooded the island. From a Western perspective, this was progress. Increased supply, decreased costs, improved efficiency. From a Western perspective, it was inflation. Not an inflation in the abstract sense, but an inflation of meaning. The new stones didn't carry the same stories, didn't represent the same sacrifice or risk, weren't embedded in memory. Because they lacked narrative weight, they diluted the system's credibility. The ledger was still there, but faith began to crack. Worse still, colonial rule undermined the social implementation mechanism. Authority shifted outward. Decisions were no longer resolved solely within the community. External systems began to overwrite internal consensus. When trust shifted from shared memory to imposed rule, the stones lost their anchoring function. The system didn't collapse in rebellion or chaos. It simply stopped working as intended. And here's the critical lesson. Yap's stone money failed not because it was irrational, but because it clashed with a system that refused to recognize what gave it its true value. Western rulers saw objects. They missed the faith. They saw inefficiency. They missed stability. Modern money is closer to rye stones than to gold. Your bank balance isn't something you hold in your hand. It's a number that everyone accepts exists. Government bonds are backed by trust, not metal. Digital money doesn't physically move. Ownership is updated, recorded in ledgers. Transactions happen not because objects change hands, but because systems recognize them. The difference is that modern systems hide this fact behind a veil of complexity. Yap didn't. Its people understood a fundamental thing. Money is a social technology. It works when belief is shared, ownership is clear, and incentives align behavior with stability. When belief erodes, no amount of material support can save it. The real risk in financial systems isn't theft, it's a lack of belief. Because when people stop agreeing on what counts as value, what counts as ownership, what counts as legitimacy, systems don't even need to be attacked to fail. They simply dissolve. Yap's stone money confronts us with an uncomfortable truth. Money was never about what it was made of. It was always about who trusted it and why. And once you see that, it becomes much harder to claim that modern systems are immune. History doesn't repeat itself, but incentives do. When money moves faster than understanding, when systems grow larger than trust, and faith is sustained by assurance rather than accountability, stability becomes a performance. It appears solid until the moment it turns out not to be. The lesson Yap leaves behind is not nostalgic or anti-modern, but structural. Financial freedom doesn't come from chasing better objects of value. It comes from understanding the systems that assign value in the first place, and knowing when faith is being strained too much. Money will always be a burden in some way. It either weighs down the system or the people who don't understand it.